I Hate the News is the weekly news bulletin from I Hate Politics podcast, a show about a human activity we love to hate. I'm Sunil Dasgupta. It's May 13th, 2025. The District of Columbia releases its 2025 homeless count with significant improvement. This is what President Trump has wanted, but where are the unhoused going? Mayor Bowser steps into the tipped wage debate. Montgomery County Public Schools Superintendent Thomas Taylor lays out the school district's problems. With some talk of Larry Hogan running again for Maryland governor, Delegate Mark Corman talks about the new law changing conflict rules for state governors that will affect Hogan if he returns. And more. Stay with us.
I Hate Politics is brought to you by UMBC's Political Science Program, where you'll learn to shape public policy, impact communities, and function at the center of modern society. Learn more at shadygrove.umbc.edu.
I Hate Politics is a podcast about our neighborhoods, workplaces, schools and streets, and our local governments as they function in diverse and democratic societies. This means our politics are messy, dirty, sometimes corrupt, with often self-serving politicians. But no matter how much we may hate politics, we are never exempt from it, even when we refuse to participate. In fact, the purpose of politics is to keep society moving precisely when we don't agree with each other, like now. Music for this episode comes from Arlington-based experimental music composer and producer Pierre Bernasconi. There is a lot of AI music in this genre today, but not here, where Bernasconi used a Minilogue, Cobalt 8X, and LTD guitar with Focusrite, as well as the software Reaper DAW, and many FX pedals. You can find his music on SoundCloud and YouTube. Washington, D.C. just reported out that its annual census of the homeless in the city, called the Point-in-Time Count, showed a 9% reduction in the city's unhoused population. The census is conducted one day in the year. This year, it was January 29th. The new number comes at a time when President Trump has pushed the D.C. government toward what he has called beautification of the city. For decades now, we have known that homeless populations respond to police and government crackdowns on street and outdoor living by moving elsewhere to jurisdictions that are not at that moment conducting clearing operations. The point-in-time count is part of a larger DMV area census coordinated by the Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments. 2024 data showed that while the district is host to the largest number of homeless people in the region, more than all the other jurisdictions combined, the aggregate number of unhoused in the city reduced over the 4-year period 2020 to 2024. As DC reduced its homeless population, there has been an increase in homeless numbers in neighboring Montgomery County in Maryland and Fairfax County in Virginia, though the count in the suburbs revealed relatively small numbers when compared to the city itself. Last year, Fairfax and Montgomery, for example, were at 1/5 DC's number. In an interview on I Hate Politics, Montgomery County's Chief Administrative Officer, Rich Madaleno, indicated that the jurisdiction may see an even bigger jump in homeless numbers this year. The full 2025 report from the Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments comes out this Wednesday, May 14th. D.C. Mayor Muriel Bowser has weighed into the tipped wage debate once again, this time calling for the repeal of the city's law, which requires raising the minimum wage for tipped workers to match the minimum wage for non-tipped workers. The tipped wage system has been separated from minimum wage law for decades, with workers typically in restaurants and other service jobs legally guaranteed a considerably lower minimum wage, in the expectation that tips would make up the rest. Restaurant owners and certain front of the house workers, like bartenders and servers at high end restaurants, sought to preserve the system because they benefited from it. But line cooks and dishwashers and even servers at smaller restaurants often ended with depressed wages, and those are the people expected to benefit from the new law. Last year, 2024, after years of campaigning by a coalition of service workers, DC voters finally supported a referendum for this law. But restaurant owners have continued to lobby for a repeal. Mayor Bowser, who has been fighting to keep businesses in the district, now has plans to introduce repeal legislation. Montgomery County Public Schools has been going through a half a decade of stasis, says Superintendent Thomas Taylor, speaking to the District 18 Breakfast Club meeting in Parkway, Delhi, a Southern Montgomery County institution.
The last 5 years have not been great. As a matter of fact, coming out of the pandemic and even before the pandemic, we had a little bit of a slow drip in terms of academic performance and even some things that were associated with student behaviors. And some of the programs that we had some equity balance issues. We've had not a great half decade going into this academic school year. Since the housing market collapse in 2008 and subsequently fiscal 09 to date, we have been in a constant state of playing catch up in terms of matching our needs and our financial resources. Even though our enrollment seems to be relatively flat at around 160,000 students, which makes us the 14th largest school system in America, our enrollment does have some changes. And the two most dramatic changes are really, really significant because they have a huge impact on the services that we provide and how much it costs to provide them. The first one is a rapid change in the number of students with disabilities. This really has jumped significantly over the last several years in a really meaningful way, and the type of disabilities that the school system is serving are a lot more dynamic than what we have been serving in the past. That's number one. Number two, our emergent multilingual learners. You may remember this when, if you had a kid in school, that we had ESOL classes. This group is our fastest growing student population. And for every student that leaves the school system, 1/3 of a student is replaced with someone who is learning the English language for the very first time. The amount of services that our students with disabilities and our emergent multilingual learners need is significantly amplified at a margin of 2 to 1. The last little bit that I'm gonna share with you is that we've had a sharp increase in the number of students who receive the federal free lunch program. We are over 40% of the students in Montgomery County who are living in poverty. We have gone from roughly 1/3 of our students to nearly half of our students who need a lot of extra assistance. And one of the things that hasn't changed but that really does need to change is how we account for that in terms of our service approach. Because students are coming less prepared to school. Students are coming without the requisite materials and supplies they need to be successful in school. On the other side of that, we have had some management challenges over the last couple of years, and we have several self-inflicted wounds. We have an employee benefits plan that was not funded properly and is not sustainable. Never should have happened. Never should have gotten us into this place, but here we are, and now we've got this problem and we have to solve it. It is nearly $100 million problem to solve, and it is not how we would want to spend our money. We had adjusted our student conduct practices kind of quietly and without a lot of public comment and public involvement. As a matter of fact, there was zero after the pandemic to kind of relax some expectations for our young people? Well, we've made some adjustments. And one of those big adjustments is tightening up some restrictions on when and where students can use their cell phones. Another big restriction is we don't want to leave it to the teacher to have to adjudicate when something really serious happens in the classroom. And what we've been doing over the last several years doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me as a parent, and it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me as a school administrator, is that when something serious happens in the classroom, it's really up to the teacher to decide what the first level of consequence is.
Superintendent Taylor also talked about the good news: improved literacy, changes to student conduct, resetting of expectations in the classroom, both for academics and behavior. One of the most puzzling facts about MCPS is the massive increase in the number of free and reduced meals eligible students, called the farms rate, which has been long used as a proxy for poverty in schools. So on the one hand, school poverty is rising. On the other, home prices in the county are going through the roof. All this while the overall population is stagnant and may even be going down slightly. How could this be? Stagnant population, dramatically rising home prices, and dramatically rising farms rate. Who is buying these new homes at these inflated prices if the bulk of the population the county is adding are low-income families eligible for the free and reduced meals program? When presented with the puzzle, several Montgomery County officials have said that while the county is adding low-income and upper-income families, middle class is leaving mainly due to rising housing costs. If this is true, why would home values in places like Aspen Hill and Wheaton increase sharply? One hypothesis is that more families are cohabitating in a single-family home than before, but that would mean that the overall population should increase. If you are like me looking at Aspen Hill and Wheaton, you would have seen increase in Hispanic families moving into these neighborhoods until maybe the pandemic. Since then, many of the neighborhoods have seen sharp increases in home prices, and new families moving in now tend to be white, middle class, and with little children. If you have thoughts on the puzzle, please reach out to us at producer@ihbpod.org with possible answers, guest ideas, or simply talk back. We always love to hear from you. As gossip mounts about former Governor Larry Hogan making a comeback to run for governor again, a new law passed by the General Assembly will change the way governors deal with their personal assets while in office. State Delegate Mark Corman was the sponsor of a bill that has just been signed into law by the current governor, Wes Moore. You could say a Larry Hogan ethics bill.
Provocative prompt, Sunil, but there's no Larry Hogan ethics bill. This is a gubernatorial ethics bill. But it is true that some reporting from Time Magazine and another local Washington publication before that about some things that took place when Governor Hogan was in office did raise a lot of concerns with people and did help instigate the legislation that Governor Moore signed earlier this week to ensure that all future governors are being above board with the residents of the state of Maryland. And what it does is a few things, but one, it standardizes our rules for blind trust, requiring all governors to put assets that are appropriate for a blind trust in a blind trust within 6 months of taking office. The reason that we need to give them 6 months is it can actually be a somewhat complex drafting and financial arrangement that has to happen, and we require our state ethics commission to be very involved with that. So it does take a little time. It also requires for assets that are not appropriate for a blind trust that the governors enter into non-participation agreements and that those be publicly posted, including being shared with the Board of Public Works secretary to make sure that governors are not participating in activities that would affect their own business or their family's business going forward. And then finally, it adds some information for government contracting to require disclosure, where an applicant for a government contract, someone competing for a government contract, has to sort of be transparent about the fact that they have some relationship or maybe are partly owned by the governor or someone directly related to the governor. As you know, sunshine is the best disinfectant. So a lot of this is about improving transparency so that folks like yourself, journalists, other citizens can sort of be attentive to these things, in addition to making sure that we're putting sort of legal boundaries in place. We want those transparency efforts to allow people in Maryland to see what's going on and ensure their governors are acting appropriately.
Well, use Governor Hogan's example to explain why this was even necessary.
Yeah, I think people can read the stories for themselves, but there were a number of stories written, as I mentioned, about Governor Hogan voting on certain grants, changing certain transportation funding priorities in a way that either directly or indirectly affected his long-held business, which he put in a trust run by his brother during the time he was governor. There were also stories about grants and agreements that affected land and property owned by direct relatives of his. So obviously those things are concerning, and whether or not the governor was purposely doing things or not, that's not really for me to say, but we don't want any question about that. And so we want to make sure that in the future, no governor is facing a situation where they have to even be questioned on something like this, because they just won't be participating in those decisions.
Can you explain what blind trust means in this context? So if a governor puts in trust assets with his brother, that's not blind.
Right. Well, certainly what Governor Hogan set up was not a blind trust, and he was allowed to look at information about what was happening with his companies. Whether or not he did that, I can't say. I don't know. Governor Hogan doesn't share that with me, but certainly that is not a blind trust. That is just a trust.
But if it's a brother, is that automatically not a blind trust?
Yeah. So under our bill, you will no longer be able to use a relative or actually anybody like that as a trustee. You have to use a financial institution as a trustee under the legislation that unanimously passed and was signed by Governor Moore. Even if you could say without this law that a trust, the blind trust could be set up under your brother, it's just a little hard to believe that things don't come up around the holiday dinner table. And so it sort of raises the question of whether something is truly blind. But in addition, a business like Larry Hogan's, which, very few governors are blessed enough to have. There are other examples around the country, but not a lot of other examples in Maryland, excuse me. That may not be appropriate for a blind trust because they don't necessarily have the ability to totally not know what's going on in a company that they owned and ran for a number of years. That's where the non-participation agreements come in, and this idea of, okay, you may know about this business interest, therefore you should not be participating in decisions related to this business interest, including decisions about the awarding of grants.
Obviously, this is a big federal issue as well. The president has access to his company's information. His children are deeply involved in the business, and obviously same kinds of principles apply. So is there some hope that you might see a federal push toward this? Are you trying to set up an example?
I was very happy to see Time Magazine in their coverage of this quoted, I think it was George W. Bush's ethics officer saying that this is the kind of law we need at the national level. That would be nice. I don't have a lot of hope at the current moment, where we seem to be going in the other direction, and any sort of strictures that we used to expect of our federal executive, of the president, seems to have sort of been cast off. I mean, they are printing meme money. That is, as far as I can tell, just a direct bribe. You buy something with the president's face on it that has basically no value, and he gets to put that money in his pocket. If Barack Obama or Franklin Delano Roosevelt had done that, there would have been absolute outcry and screaming from the other side. So it's a pretty sad state of affairs. So I would love to see improvements like this move forward at the national level. I'm also clear-eyed and recognize that we can take care of our own house in Maryland. Our national partners don't always listen.
Mark Corman, thank you.
Thanks for having me.
This is a story close to home. A federal judge has allowed a lawsuit against my employer, UMBC, to proceed. The plaintiff is Brian Barrio, the university's former athletic director from 2020 to 2024. Barrio claims that he was improperly fired by UMBC over a Title IX investigation into a former university swimming coach, Chad Craddock, who was found by the U.S. Department of Justice to have touched male swimmers without consent and recorded video of them in the shower, as well as looked the other way when male swimmers attacked female swimmers, sometimes within dating relationships. All of this happened between 2015 and 2020, prior to Barrio taking the athletic director job at UMBC. In his complaint, Barrio says that he was the whistleblower on the Craddock scandal, but then the university made him a scapegoat to show the state of Maryland that it was taking action. The state approved a $4.1 million settlement for students affected by Craddock's misconduct. That's all for this episode. Be sure to check out our feature interview series that comes out Friday mornings. I Hate Politics is produced by me, Sunil Dasgupta, with support from the University of Maryland, Baltimore County. I direct UMBC's political science program at the universities of Shady Grove in Montgomery County, where, among other things, we explore and learn about politics, government, and society close to home. Music for this episode comes from Arlington-based experimental music composer and producer Pierre Bernasconi. You can find his music on SoundCloud and YouTube.